Okay, so you should have already watched the video about value that just kind of goes over what value is and how we think about value in art. And you should also watch the video called Throwing Shade, where I talk about how to apply the ideas and concept about value in various techniques and how to actually apply that when you're drawing. So you have these slides. They're just called value exercises as slides on Canvas in the module about value. And you're going to utilize these when you're doing your drawings for the in-class value drawings. Okay, so basically what this is just a little video of me walking you through what you're looking at in these images. So the first ones just show you a labeled and detailed breakdown of where those terms that we talk about when we talk about value are located on different forms. So in the value lecture, we have a sphere where we're identifying all of these forms. And here I just like to show you how that varies between the different forms. And I talk about that a little bit in the Throwing Shade lecture, okay? We also talk about it a little bit in the lecture From Shape to Form, from back when we were talking about shape. But these are just some images for your reference that can help you when you actually start doing these drawings and adding value, so that you can kind of compare what you're doing on these different forms to these diagrams that have all the information laid out. And I have them for a cylinder and a cone as well, because we have different kinds of forms that are going to be in these slides that you use for your exercises. So the first few are really simple. They kind of go in order of most simple to most complex. What I'd like for you to do is to not just pick all simple ones. I'd like you to pick some simple ones to replicate and draw, and then some kind of medium ones and some more difficult ones, so that you're really challenging yourself, okay? I want a nice array of different kinds of subject matter. So this first one is just your basic cube. Same kind of idea with a cone. A little bit more complicated. Here we have a cube and a cylinder next to each other. And notice in these that you can see really clearly the different ways that value sits on these different basic forms. So when we look at a cube, the top plane, the top square part of that cube, is our highlight. It's the lightest value. The side that's kind of facing off this way is our midtone. The side facing more toward us, that's the darker one, that's our core shadow, right? So when you have something that has these hard edges like a cube, and I talk about this in the Throwing Shade video, it's kind of easier because you're like, this value goes all the way across here, this one goes across here, this one goes across here, then I'll put in my cast shadow. When you look at something like a sphere or a cylinder, it's a little bit trickier, right? Because we have our core shadow on the end, on the circle part of the cylinder over here. But on the main side of the cylinder that we see, you have a gradation of value, which I also talk about in Throwing Shade and in Shape to Form. So on rounded surfaces like that don't have these hard edges with geometric intersections, we have a gradation rather than an all-over value. So we have kind of a core shadow midtone at the bottom, going up into lighter midtones, going up into our highlight. And then we have that solid core shadow on the flat circular end. We also have cast shadow both underneath that side of the cylinder and a little underneath the end, the circular end. So it's important to notice that when you're working with these kind of images. Similar, we have a cube with a cone on top of it. Again, on that surface of the cone, you're going to see a gradation, whereas the sides of the cube, you're going to have fairly consistent value throughout each side. And here you want to notice that the cast shadow of the cone casts down onto the cube. So that the cone creates a little bit of difference in the value on that facet of the cube. A sphere on top of a cube, same kind of idea, right? Two cylinders, notice the cast shadow of the vertical cylinder is cast onto the side of the horizontal cylinder. A cylinder, a cube, and a sphere. Again, all of these, when you draw these, you're going to look at the slides so that you can have as much time on each of them as you need. But I just like to go through and point things out just so you are familiar. Here's a cube and some rectangular prisms. We've got a sphere, a cylinder, and a cube. So basically these are just different arrangements that are getting increasingly complex of these basic geometric forms, okay? So I want you to pick like one of these really simple guys, either the cone or the cube, and then I'd like you to pick a little bit more complicated that has maybe 2 forms. Then maybe go on to some of these a little more complicated that have 3 forms. Then try one with 4. Try some of these that have a little bit more complicated kind of arrangements. And just pay attention to the details in these. Look at where that cast shadow is. Look at what object is in front of another object and how the objects sit in relation to each other. This one I think is one of the nicest ones. It has really clean light, so it's really easy to see where all the values are. This one we're introducing some more complicated shapes, right? We have some kind of irregular shapes coming in here. So pick out one of these that has a complicated shape to do. This one has even more complicated shapes involved. And then these are just sort of really unusual shapes to find. So I'd like you to do at least one of these that has these really difficult shapes in it. And then this is, so when we get into portraiture, we're going to talk about the human head and the human face a lot. But I like to throw this in here to start kind of translating what we've learned about value from throwing shade and from shape to form, and start applying that knowledge to how the human face is and how the human head works. So you don't have to do one of these for this exercise, but I like to put these here so that you start thinking about it and maybe start practicing on your own, looking at how this information about value application translates into organic forms like the human figure. And this is just proportions and helping think about how proportions are going to relate and thinking about how the planes of the face are going to relate to value. Okay, so go in and pick some of those out and do your drawing. Make sure you've already watched the video on the lecture video on value and the lecture video on throwing shade. Okie dokie. I'll see you next time.